I never thought at 55 that, I'd be getting married.
This wasn't just a wedding. This was a billionaire's fairy tale clashing with a city's breaking point. When Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez touched down in Venice for their much-anticipated wedding, the streets of the floating city were already buzzing, not just with paparazzi, but with protesters, banners, and smoke flares. Billion-dollar glamour met fierce resistance in a moment that has left the world divided: luxury or lunacy, celebration or spectacle. This is the story of how one wedding lit a firestorm across Venice and possibly changed the city's future forever. It started like a scene out of a movie. Yachts lining the canals, celebrities stepping off water taxis, dressed in designer. Everything, even Bezos himself, was spotted, grinning and blowing kisses to cameras at Harry's bar, pure opulence. But while the elite clinked glasses behind guarded walls outside, a different crowd was gathering. Venetians were not in the mood to celebrate. Hundreds of them hit the streets, not with confetti, but with chants and banners that read, "No space for Bezos." Their message was loud and clear. The world's second richest man wasn't welcome. Not like this. Not here. Flares lit up the skyline, and protesters marched through the city's ancient walkways. Their cause wasn't just about one man. It was about what he represented: over-tourism, unchecked capitalism, and a climate crisis fueled by the same elites that had descended on their home. Originally, activists had even planned to jump into the canals with inflatable crocodiles to block guests, but that plan was dropped last minute. Still, their presence couldn't be ignored. The protests were as much a performance as the wedding itself, and while guests posed for photos, demonstrators made sure their own spectacle was seen. The contrast couldn't have been sharper inside the event. There was champagne, laughter, and history in the making. Outside, frustration and fury spilling into cobbled streets for locals. It wasn't just about Bezos, it was about their city. Venice has always drawn attention, but this time it wasn't romantic gondola rides or carnival masks stealing the spotlight. It was the tension between old beauty and new wealth. One protester, Paola, a member of the climate group Extinction Rebellion, voiced what many felt. Venice, she said, is turning into an amusement park, not a city. A playground for billionaires who fly in on private jets, leave trails of carbon, and then vanish, leaving locals to pick up the pieces. She wasn't alone in her anger. For years, Venetians have watched as cruise ships flood their canals, as historic homes become luxury rentals, and as small businesses are replaced by high-end boutiques. Now add a Bezos wedding to the mix, and you've got a powder keg of resentment. But here's where it gets even more intense. The city's leaders didn't just ignore the protests. They pushed back hard. Deputy Mayor Simone Venturini called the activists narcissists and defended the wedding as exactly the kind of high-quality tourism Venice needs. He doubled down, saying, "We are not Iran. We don't have moral police choosing who can marry here." He wasn't just supporting Bezos. He was defending an entire vision for Venice, one built on elite events, global attention, and luxury branding. And in his eyes, this wedding wasn't a problem. It was a model, a commercial for what Venice could be to the world. He even hoped the spectacle would inspire more rich couples to tie the knot there, pumping cash into the economy. But not everyone agreed. And even the authorities couldn't deny the heat from the protests was real. So much so, they quietly moved the wedding's main event out of the city center, shifting it to a more secure venue called Arsenale. For some activists, that was a small win, a sign that their voices had reached someone somewhere. But the bigger question loomed. What kind of future does Venice really want? And what price comes with selling its soul to billionaires? Because while the party lights shimmered over the Grand Canal and music echoed through private halls, something darker was rising in the streets: unrest, fatigue, and a sense that the city's identity was slipping away. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The morning after the wedding, Venice woke up to a city divided. On one side were the glowing reviews from fashion bloggers, celebrity guests, and luxury magazines that called the event magical, iconic, and unforgettable. On the other were voices of anger, disillusionment, and deep concern. Locals who had watched the glitz from a distance couldn't help but ask, is this really what Venice wants to become? A playground for the mega-rich, or a living, breathing city with soul and history? The debate was no longer just about one wedding. It was about identity, tradition, and the future of a place already drowning under the weight of mass tourism. For people like Paola, and her fellow activists. This wedding was a perfect symbol of everything they feared, a city being auctioned off to the highest bidder, a place where the needs of locals are drowned out by the roar of luxury engines. Their frustration wasn't abstract. It was personal: rising rents, disappearing neighbors, crowded streets, and the eerie silence of once lively corners, now filled with empty Airbnbs. Some Venetians had already left unable to afford life in their own hometown. Others stayed and fought back in whatever ways they could, hanging signs, staging protests, or simply refusing to be invisible anymore. Meanwhile, critics of the protest movement accused them of being too dramatic, too political, too noisy. But for the demonstrators, this was survival. They weren't trying to cancel a wedding. They were trying to save a city. And while some scoffed at the idea that one party could cause so much trouble, others saw it differently. They believed this wedding shined a spotlight on a truth too many ignored, that Venice was slowly being consumed by luxury tourism and corporate interest. Not all opposition came from protesters, either. Some quieter voices from the community spoke up. 2. Elderly residents, historians, small business owners. They didn't carry banners, but their message was just as serious. The heart of Venice, they said, is fading, and if no one stops it soon, the damage may be permanent. This wasn't about nostalgia, it was about preservation. The same canals that carried lovers and artists now ferried influencers and billionaires. The same palazzos that once housed generations of Venetians now served as backdrops for Instagram posts and magazine spreads. And yet, in the middle of all this, there was also confusion, because even those critical of the extravagance couldn't deny the money weddings, like this, bring jobs, attention, tourism dollars, and in a city still recovering from a global pandemic. Some welcomed that with open arms. The divide wasn't just between elites and activists, it was between hope and fear, between economic opportunity and cultural erosion. And that's what made this story so powerful. It wasn't black and white. It was layered, complex, emotional, on the same day that flares were lit under protest. Wedding planners were counting their biggest win of the season, and luxury vendors were sealing deals for future events. Two Venices coexisting, one of silent resistance, the other of sparkling celebration, and for Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez, it was mission accomplished. The wedding went off the party, dazzled, and the headlines traveled across the globe, but long after the cameras turned away, the city they left behind was still grappling with the meaning of it all. Because beneath the surface of the glamour and controversy, something deeper was unfolding, a reckoning. Venice, a city built on water, was now floating on questions no one had clear answers to. How do you balance beauty and commerce? How do you protect history without rejecting the future? And most importantly, who gets to decide what Venice should be for every wedding that brings in millions? How many families are pushed further out for every gala that fills the night with lights? How many voices are dimmed in silence? The wedding of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez may have lasted only a weekend, but the ripple effects will be felt far longer. It became a mirror reflecting not just the excess of the ultra-rich, but also the fragile state of cultural heritage. Worldwide cities like Venice are becoming battlegrounds between preservation and profit, between legacy and luxury. And in that fight, symbolism matters when billionaires rent out ancient landmarks, when security forces block off public streets, when influencers flood places once sacred to locals. It tells a story, and not everyone likes the ending. Some believe events like this are the future, polished, profitable, and powerful. Others fear they're the beginning of the end, where every alleyway becomes a runway and every tradition becomes a trend. But the truth is somewhere in between, because the voices of the people are growing louder with each passing event, from Venice to Barcelona, from Paris to Prague. Ordinary citizens are standing up for the soul of their cities, and they're not just shouting, they're organizing, creating, pushing back. And while it's easy to dismiss one protest as a moment of noise, the real power lies in what comes after. Change doesn't come from headlines. It comes from pressure, from persistence, from the uncomfortable questions that force cities to choose between their image and their essence. And Venice now stands at that very crossroads, with the world watching. The Bezos wedding was more than a spectacle. It was a spotlight, and what it revealed has struck a chord from the marble floors of private galas to the stone streets of local markets. Everyone is now asking, what kind of future will Venice write for itself? Will it be a story of rebirth or surrender? Will it chase celebrity or embrace community? And perhaps the biggest question of all, who will Venice truly belong to, the ones who visit or the ones who stay? Because once the music fades and the dresses are packed away, what remains is not the party. It's the place, and what we choose to protect says more about us than any wedding ever could.